Still can't see it. So, yeah, well, thank you for the welcome. I've been interested in tramways for a long, long time, and just got some notes here that said that my father, when he was discharged from the army, he had lots of friends, and we used to go out on picnics with the extended family because in those days, with rationing, meat rationing and everything, and petrol rationing, it was hard to survive. So being out of the army, they used to go up for our underground mutton, which was rabbits. So we'd go rabbiting on most weekends when they had enough petrol coupons. And the family had been associated with railways. My father was a model builder. He had live steam aggregators running around the backyard when I was born, and he built a lot of his own models and locos. So I was sort of, it was in my blood. I didn't have any choice. But anyway, we went up over the Black Spur to Taggart in the Cathedral Range, and one of Mum's brothers had a board after he came out of the airport, had a boarding house in the Market Garden at Thornton, and so there was lots of tramways and stuff around there as well that you came across when we were running around the countryside. I was only about 6 or 7 at the time, so it didn't make a lot of sense to me, but it was good fun. But the Yarra Valley was my favourite destination, and at Warburton, the Petrol Timber Company was still bringing barrel staves down to Lala, and sorry about that, the Brimbonga Sawmills at Big Pat's Creek was still, they had a seasoning works there, and also the hardwood company was still operating a mill at Powelltown. So I'll move on from there. In 1959, a couple of mates and myself decided that we were going to spend the Easter up in the Yarra Valley. So as I was under 18 at the time, we couldn't drive, and you didn't have a car anyway, so we went by train. And the train, the suburban train that ran to Lilydale Station for the junction for Healesville and Warburton left Flinders Street on every evening at 5 p.m. And it was a couple of electric Tate carriages with 2 vans and 4 country passenger coaches of different heritage. Some were modern, but most of them were ancient old ones. It ran express to Box Hill, where we got on, and it took from Flinders Street to Box Hill only 19 minutes, which was a rather good pace. Then it ran express to Ringwood and finally onto Lilydale at 5:54. There the train was divided, and 2 carriages and a van with a loco went to Healesville and 2 went to Warburton. So we got on the Warburton one and set off, and we arrived at Yarra Junction about 5 to 7, and it was just about dark. And so we put on our packs and walked out and got onto the road to Powelltown, and then we found a vacant block, and we set up our 2 little tents and we camped there for the night. And the next morning we headed off to on the road to Powelltown. Now this is a photo of Yarra Junction Railway Station, which still exists today as a museum. The Upper Yarra Historical Society run it as a museum, and I was instrumental in helping them get it organised in the early days when they started. The tracks are gone, but they've got a really good museum, a lot of photographs, and a rail tractor on display there as well. In the early days, when the Powelltown Victorian Hardwood Company started, this was their Baldwin locomotive, Little Yarra, which they imported, and they ran through to Powelltown. It was a mighty fine machine, and the tramway itself was 3-foot gauge was laid as a really first-class tramway. Under the Government's Act at the time, anyone other than the Victorian Railways could not call their railway a railway. They had to call it a tramway. So that's why we had timber tramways in Victoria. There she's loaded up with bags of chaff and other things to go through to Powelltown. On the way through, there were several halts or stations on the way to Powelltown. This was their other loco, Powellite, running through with their passenger carriages and a couple of flat cars. You can see there's another tramway coming in the front of the photograph there. As we walked along the right-of-way, it was really very visible. The rails and everything gone, but it had been ballasted, so it maintained its formation. And this was the remains of one of the bridges. There were several low trestle bridges along the way, and we could follow along pretty well on the right-of-way, except where it had been sold to private people, and you had to sort of go back onto the road there. But it's pretty well all gone now, but it was very well maintained right-of-way. Now, this is an early shot of the Powelltown Mill, which was quite a substantial mill. And in the background there, you can see the workers' huts. They looked after their employees pretty well. They had workers' huts for families. They all had running water, and it was electricity. It was a really good mill town, Powelltown. In the foreground, you've got the station building and offices, and there you can see a couple of trains made up, and Powellite is there ready to head off to Yarra Junction, and Little Yarra's on the front of the train. This is another shot of the Powelltown Mill, an earlier one with Little Yarra there, and the office buildings and station sort of on the left. The train has come in, and you can see a flat car loaded with bags of chaff, because there were a large number of horses were used in the bush for snigging logs and pulling the tramway bogies and that around. So it was a really interesting operation with lots of horsepower, but the 4-legged variety. When we were there in 1959, the Powelltown Mill was still operating at pretty well full strength, and this is one of their rail tractors they had. It's just entering onto a traverser, which they used to move the loads of timber between the various lines out of the mill, where they had scantling lines and board timber lines. And also it connected through to the seasoning kilns as well. So, and that particular tractor is now on display in Yarra Junction. Now, I just included this as an interesting shot because this is actually the Federal Timber Company's line at East Warburton, where the tractor is coming in. And this was a publicity shot that I got from Day's engineering works, and they were using this to send out to various sawmillers all around the country and overseas, advertising their wares, that they could produce rail tractors of sufficient horsepower to be able to pull along several loads of timber. And the bridge in the foreground there crossed over the Yarra River. At a later stage, there's a photograph, which I haven't got here now, which showed the bridge giving away and the whole lot ending up in the river. So that was towards the end of the line. This is a shot of Powellite in Yarra Junction Railway Yard. by this stage, the locos had been turned around. Originally, they all ran straight into to Powelltown, and then later on they changed it so that the locos ran loco first into Yarra Junction with the full load, and tender first back to Powelltown with the passengers and other assorted items. Pardon me. Now, here I'll give you a chance to have a look at it. This was taken from a booklet called 130 Walking Tours around Melbourne, and it was published in the middle 30s by one of the Melbourne walking clubs. And it's interesting because they describe exactly what it was that you were going to see. You walked along the tram and the various stations and everything, and it's I found it fascinating to be able to follow this in later years when you went walking in the bush and trying to work out what had been there and what had gone. So because this has been being recorded, you'll be able to see these at your own leisure later on. But it describes exactly what how the line went when it went through the tunnel, the village at Nayook West, which the Forest Commission also had mill and houses there. There was a couple of boarding houses built along the line too, ran by private citizens to house mill workers and other people that worked out in the mills. In the early days, most of the mill workers that worked in the bush where the mills were and they were cutting timber had their families there too. So quite a few of the bigger mills had a small sort of settlement around them, and even schools, state schools and stuff were built. So it was an interesting time until the 26 fires knocked out a lot of the mills, and then they were rebuilt, and then 39 came in, and that was the end of it. The 39 bushfires destroyed most of the tram lines, most of the mills, and after that they changed back to road transport, and the tramways disappeared. But they're still there now, and the Forest Commission, now Parks Victoria, have opened a lot of them up as walking tracks, so it's possible to go out there for people that are allowed to go out in the state of Victoria to see. And it's fascinating when you think about how it was. Now, this is a map of the Yarra Valley area that was prepared by Frank Stamford many years ago, and it shows the line on the left. You go to Powelltown, and this is heading out into the bush through the tunnel and around to Splitters Camp, and it shows the various bridges numbered there. And also on the right of the thing, you've got a dotted line for Knott's Mill. Now, at Knott's Mill, there was a tram line that came from there, and a bit further around, it was actually a steel line that ran all the way to Newgee. So you had the Goodwood Timber Company running their locos, and they were 3-foot 6 gauge. So it was they were using Western Australian locos and running quite a substantial sort of operation. But the Powelltown line came around to the point at Splitters Camp. Now, Splitters Camp was at the bottom of an incline, which was known as the high lead incline. The high lead being a system for moving logs about using a high spar tree and cables, and this was the actual incline itself was about 1 in 4 grade, so it was fairly steep. And I walked up it a couple of times in the early days when it was covered with bush, and it was an effort, I can tell you. So, but I was much younger then. So at Splitters Camp was the end of the steam haul, and the shays ran out there and timber. There was also a couple of huts there, and on the way out there was a boarding house and a shop as well. When you go up the high lead incline, up to the top to Dowie Spur Road, there was a winch set up there which lowered the trams down, and they had a passing loop halfway. So a loaded log train coming down, or timber bogies coming down, helped pull the empty ones up, and they passed halfway down by the length of the cable such that they could pass each other there and then continue to the top, over the top of Dowie Spur, and then ran down the other side into the Yarra Valley. And the Yarra Valley was had beautiful timber there, and it had been logged probably from the early days around about 1910. There was on that map, it shows you on the left-hand side the old Yarra Mill, and then you come back from there, and there was Yarra number 1, and a whole lot of, as you can see, heading back towards the high lead incline at Yarra number 2. It ran virtually along the Yarra River, so there were a lot of trestles and makeups, and it was very pretty country, but very difficult to get around in the later years. From Yarra Mill, there was an incline went up, and there's a winch shown above the other line, and the federal line was built later, and it operated probably till the end, till about 1950. They were cutting barrel staves for casks, and that timber was taken down to Warburton and railed to the Federal Cask Company at Footscray, which had a cask factory along the Maribyrnong River there. And that was an interesting one because mostly it was tractor worked, and they cut the timber at New Federal Mill and then sent the barrel staves down. Now, this is Archaeology in the Yarra Valley by Frank Stanford. And this was a 3-day hike that the Light Railway Society did in 1968. And it was very interesting going there. We had set up tents and camps for people, and we used cars to ferry people around and then walk the other bits and pieces in between. So Frank had written an account of this, which appeared in the early Light Railway magazine. And it covers pretty well everything that happened in that Yarra Valley, from Powelltown out to the bump, along Dowie Spur Road, and then up to Federal Tramway, up to New Federal Mill, and up to the new Yarra Mill as well. The interesting thing with the crossing of, because the Federal line was coming along a sidling up the valley, and the Yarra line, new Yarra line, was going up the side of the hill and crossed it at right angles, and the Federal Tramway had lift out rails, which they dropped in when they were bringing a tram through with timber, because the Yarra Valley line and the new Yarra line was there first, and they had right away. So it was a matter of the winch on the line to New Yarra Mill pull their loads up and down, and when the Federal tram was coming along, the operator had to stop and drop the steel rails in place so they could cross over and then take them off again. There's some interesting things happening in the bush in the early days. Now, these are a couple of photographs that were taken by Ray Jude, one of the members. On the left there, it shows the line to New Yarra Mill, which was pretty well intact. It hadn't been taken up. It was a mixture of steel rails and wooden rails, and sometimes had steel straps on the wooden rails. A winch halfway up pulled everything up until it got onto fairly level ground where horses could move them, and I don't think the tractors operated there much. I think it was mostly seems to have been horse-drawn originally. The one on the right is intrepid explorers crossing one of the trestle bridges that wasn't all quite all there, but most of them were all right as long as you were careful when crossing them. No good if it was wet or in the rain. But some of these bridges were 20, 30 foot high, you know, which is 10 metres or so. It's quite exciting, and you've got dense bush and fern gullies either side of you, and you're crawling through. This is a photograph in 59 of one of the low trestles coming around towards Splitters Camp, which is where Knott's Mill was off to the right, and this ran around to the bottom of the incline where the shays ended. But that was all that was left there in 59. Now this is a shot show you how good the line was. This was known as the Big Bridge, coming around steel railed, quite an impressive sight. Long gone now, but what wasn't burnt in fires has been destroyed in later years. And down on the left is Horner and Manette's tramway. Now, Horner and Manette were sawmillers that operated in the area from the early days, along with the hardwood company. Their lines were all horse-drawn, and they had stables where this line came round and joined onto the Powelltown Company's lines. They had stables there for their horses, and they had mills up towards Starling's Gap. And they operated there for many years. You could still follow parts of this line. When we first went up in 1959, you could pick up the right of way and bush bash your way through. And this is a classic shot. This is another shot of the Big Bridge with with coffee pot on the bridge on the way out to Splitters Camp, pulling log bogies loaded up with bags of chaff and odd brakemen and other people there. And as I say, you're fairly high up above the ground there. And it was a substantial trestle, and you had shays and big loads of logs and sawn timber running over it. So it was well braced. And below the bridge in the background there, you can see the Horner and Manette's tramway going along and curving up to the left. On your way up to the bush, this is a log loading site, and here you can see that they've had horses that have been snigging logs in, and they've been loaded onto the hardwood company's log bogies the hard way, with the jack on the right hand side being used to position it onto the bogie and then tie it down. In the background you can see the main line, and in the middle ground is the Powellite loco. This is another shot. You can see the substantial earthworks that they put in place when they put the tunnel in under the divide, the bump tunnel. There was some fairly substantial embankments, and they've built to keep a reasonable grade. So here you've got the shay loco coming around. It's pushing a couple of loaded bogies with sawn timber, and the logs are there behind it, and it's going to pick up the next lot of them. So as I say, it was a very substantial operation. It was quite dull and dark when you were hiking along these old lines. So this was a cribbing bridge, which if they weren't doing a trestle, they often, because there were plenty of trees around, so they would cut the logs and just build up a cribbage support under the bed logs before they put their sleepers and the rail on. And they were decent sized logs too, but it was a reasonably cheap and easy way to cross a creek or a swampy area and that. And they lasted well into the 60s. Now this is a classic photo. This is members of the Light Railway Society in Easter 1968. Frank Stamford is, if you come in from the right-hand side in the back line, you can see 1, 2, 3, that's Frank there. Next to him is Mark Plummer, who was one of the early members of the society. On the right-hand end is Graham Watford, who was tied up with the Puffing Billy Society for many years. And Don and Norma Marshall. Don Marshall was with Puffing Billy, was their engineering manager for many years, and was a commercial airline pilot as well. So, but that was the team that was up there at that Easter, and the cars, and we, as I say, we set up the tents, and my wife and Norma Marshall looked after the meals, the catering, and we then ferried the various members around to different spots in the line, and as you could read in Frank's report of it in the Light Railways. But in those days, it was we weren't as big a society as we are now. This is another shot coming into the Ada River. It was a fairly flat area, but was quite wet and swampy. The river was sort of minuscule in the middle, but the river flats were quite broad, and so they had some decent low trestle bridges right through, and they were burnt out a couple of times as the Ada No. 2 mill was completely burnt out. But they restored them back again when they were bringing timber down from the new Ada mill. Prior to reaching the Ada mill and the Ada River, there was a branch line went off to the left, which was going back along the Ada River, and that went down to Ada No. 1. And Ada No. 1 mill was operated by tractors. The scrub was quite dense when we walked it, but in the early days at Ada No. 1, there were several houses there and a school and everything, so it was quite a settlement through here. Coming into Ada No. 2 mill, the remains of that, there was still a fair bit of a steel rail around when I was there in '59, and as I where it was swampy, they had just continuous boarding across until they got onto solid ground, and cables and that lying around. Now here's a classic shot. This was the original loco that they had called Squirt was cut up out at Ada No. 2 mill. And that's myself at about 17 years of age, I think. So can't quite recognise it, but yeah, and we knew it was there, so we sort of spent a day chopping around in all the scrub and undergrowth until we found it, and then cut it away. And it stayed there for many years. It was a bit too hard for scrap metal dealers to get into there across the Ada River flats to pinch everything. This is a shot of the Ada No. 2 mill. It was cut into the side of the hill there. You can see a lot of the regrowth timber around. It was a mill that they set up because in all the license and leases that they had from the Forest Commission of Victoria, if you were granted a license, then you had to spend a certain amount of money each year and do some work. So the hardwood company built this mill originally and didn't operate it for a while because they weren't ready to, but they had to show that they were doing something on their lease, otherwise they would have lost it. And there were some interesting places where people built things just to make sure that they could say, yes, yeah, well, we're operating, we're doing something. And as I say, that mill was burned out in the 39 fires, and it wasn't rebuilt after that. Now, when you leave the Ada No. 2 mill site and head uphill towards New Ada, and you cross the federal track, that's the hardwood company's timber rail line on the right-hand side. And just in the left-hand corner, you can see a bit of the steel rail, which was the Federal Timber Company's line coming along. And further up on the line running up to New Ada, this was a mixture of steel rails and wooden rails through there. And the New Ada mill was built right on the crown of the hill. And it was interesting that they had a classic, which I couldn't find a photograph of, but I remember there for their toilet facilities, they had a 6-holer built on the side of the hill. So you could sit there with your fellow workmen and look out over the valley and the view. It was, and of course, underneath was just a pit that went down, known as a long drop. It was a classic bush toilet. Yeah. Sorry, a slight technical difficulty here when I find where it is. That's better.
Looking for the projector screen, Geoff?
Sorry?
What are you looking for?
No, I was just coming back to this one, but I was...
Just click the projector screen at down the bottom again, and you'll be still there.
Oh, yes, there. That's better. Now, as I said, when we did the Easter hike, Frank had written it up for the Light Railway magazine. And what we did was we camped on Dowie Spur Road, which was above the top of the Highland incline and prior to going down into the Ada No. 2 mill site area. So we ferried people around by car to different areas, and then picked them up again at the end of that walk. And I was just looking at, yeah, so as it says here, on the way, Ada No. 1 mill was visited, and we returned by the Ada No. 1 branch back to camp. This line had not previously been seen, having been always hidden by dense undergrowth. It had innumerable very long trestle bridges, all still standing, though rotting and slippery. Some had slid sideways and partly collapsed and were at crazy angles. We finished this section just before sunset, and the foliage was gradually closing in over the tramway, creating a natural tunnel. Now, I'd looked for this line for several visits up there and could never find it when you were heading from the incline above Ada No. 2 mill to go to Ada No. 1. But when you came back the other way, you realised why, because it just closed in. And as Frank said, it was as though you were coming out of a wombat hole. It was very difficult pushing through, but at least we had about 8 people or 10 people, so you could chop your way through it. And then the next day we went up to the new Ada Mill, and as it said, the houses still stood, the long line stretch of steel rail track was still in position, and the boiler and winch to be seen. So it's an interesting operation. I'll show you back here. So here on this map, you'll see we've gone from Dowie Square Road, we'll be down into the Ada Valley, and then the line along here is the one that goes down to Ada number 1 Mill. And what we had done is that we had come up here from Starling's Gap and picked up the Ada number 1 Mill site, and then come back along this way until we hit where the branch was that came onto the main haulage line to go down the high lead. And the federal line here was where they had the steel drop-in rail sections so that the federal could cross over the Ada line going up to the new Ada mill site. And that was the new Ada Mill was the last one that they used out in the bush. After the 39 fires, the company decided that they wouldn't rebuild the mills and cut sawn timber in the bush anymore, that they would bring all their logs into Powelltown and cut it at the main mill, which was a completely excellent setup there for a large-scale production. They also changed, by 1944, they changed over to road haulage for logs. It just wasn't worthwhile to as I say, to repair tram lines and run the steam locos, and they're all pretty old anyway. So road transport with timber jinkers was coming to its own, and the Forest Commission were keen to move a lot of the fire-killed timber from 39 out of the bush into the mill sites where they could be used. So it was sort of the end of the era, and it happened all over this area of Victoria. Quite amazing. If you look on the sales shop, they've got Mike McCarthy has done a couple of excellent maps of the Warburton, Yarra Junction, Powelltown, Jamboree area, which are worth buying for the small amount of money you've got to pay. And it makes more sense when you can follow the lines, because there were dozens and dozens of mills in that area over a period of about 60 or 70 years. And as they cut it out, the early days, they were not only cutting mountain ash, they were cutting lots of excellent timber in the furniture, and it's quite an amazing area now to go in and have a look at. Pardon me, Starling's Gap, there were a couple of big trees. Too much talking, Mr. Trouble. And as I say, it's a fascinating an area. Now, in the early days when I started having an interest in light railways and tramways, I was doing a fellowship diploma of architecture at Royal Melbourne Tech, as it was known in those days. It was later RMIT University. And because I had an interest in models as well, I worked on Saturday mornings at the Model Dockyard, which was a well-known model railway and aircraft shop in Swanson Street in Melbourne. And through that, I met interesting people. So I was, because I was in the city all the time, I met Norm Wadeson, who I'd met at Puffing Billy, and in the early days, we decided to compile a list of all the tramways and light railways in Victoria. So in lunch hours, I would go up to his office in Treasury Place. He worked for the state government, and we'd beaver away at looking at all what railways we could find and what photographs we could find. Part of the group also was Les Poole. Now, Les was a interesting Irishman. He'd lost a leg early days in a motorcycle accident, and he worked as a lift driver in the Commercial Union building in Collins Street in Melbourne. And so I would go and visit him in his lunch hour. And in those days, the lifts were operated by a lift driver. So at lunchtime, he would take that down to the sub-basement where he had his little luncheon area, and we would discuss railways and look at old photographs and things. And this, as I say, is in the sort of 58, 59, 60, 61 time. Jack McLean was another person that had more of an interest in the broad gauge VR line, but he worked in Collins Street as in an insurance office, so you could go and visit him occasionally too. So there was quite a band of people that were interested, and that's where I think Les Poole told me first about Frank Stamford had started a small group called the Victorian Light Railway Research Society, and so I joined up with that. And one of Les's friends was John Buckland, who'd been walking all these tramways in the late 30s when they were still operating. So he had lots of photographs and lots of first-hand accounts. So it's been an interesting journey, and I've been fascinated by it. You accumulate a lot of photographs, and I've got, this is only just one part, the hardwood company. I've got photographs from all over Victoria. Spent a fair bit of time up in North Queensland in the 60s taking photographs of cane tramways, and we've continued to go back to Port Douglas every year when we're allowed out of lockdown, that is, and spend much of my wife's horror time driving around looking at cane locos and cane tramways. But that's about the end of my discussion, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful, thank you.
Hello, Geoff. Thank you very much for that presentation. It was wonderful. Brought back a few memories from some of the walks I've done on my own up through that area.
Yeah.
I guess anyone that's got any questions, please hit your space bar and have a talk to Geoff. Don't be shy.
Yeah, I was a bit late getting on. I was having finger trouble trying to get the Zoom program to work, but I've got it working now. And yeah, it's very interesting. I was a Rover Scout back in the late 1949s, I think it was, and I walked a lot of these tracks. There wasn't much of the timber industry left in those days. I think most of it had been decimated by fires and that sort of thing. But we found quite a few interesting relics. I got along as far as the bottom of the High Lead at one stage. I didn't tackle walking up it though. But yeah, it was beautiful country too, and there's a lot of interesting stuff around Powelltown, and there's a couple of books out about Powelltown. I think they're LRSS. Well, I've got LRRSA publications, and a lot of talk about the I think it was the Victorian Hardwood Company that used to process the timber that they got there. Anyway, perhaps somebody who can fill me in a bit more on what I've forgotten about. Okay, got to be in touch with you anyway. Bye. I'll be here.
Yeah, well, the book on Powelltown was written by Frank Stamford, Ted Stuckey, and myself.
That's right, yeah.
And in the early days when I was at Tech, in my spare time or spare periods, I'd go over to the State Public Library and was combing through all the old newspapers of the time to find accounts about what was going on with the hardwood company and photographs that appeared in that. Also, some of the other publications, the Leader and that used to have, and the Weekly Times would have photo montages of photos out, and the reporters would go out in the bush and take photos of mill workers and tram lines and that.
Yeah.
The other crew that did it was the Rose Postcard Company. Now,
Oh, yeah, that's right.
they had photographers everywhere, and they were in Paran, had a little factory, and in the early days, I went there, and they had these steel racks that went on forever, filled with glass plate negatives. And when I told them what I was interested in, they said, "Oh, well, you go in that section there and just have a look, and whatever you see there, you can have." So, being a young lad that was very acquisitive, I said, "Right, I'll do those." And how these photographers got into some of these areas just amazed me, because they were all over Victoria. They went everywhere, and the Rose Postcard series, actually, I think Gray's Online has been selling some of the photos off in the last couple of months too.
Yeah.
So where I live up in Shepparton, Victoria, we were looking for for our heritage centre, and some of the prices that people were paying for shots of the Goulburn River and the old wharf there, they got up to $300 or $400 for a photograph. So there's some keen collectors out there, I tell you.
Yes, I remember we got up as far as Starling's Gap, and then we walked from there down to East Warburton, and there was a derelict diesel, I think it was a Fordson, sitting on the side of in the middle of the paddock before you got to crossing the Yarra River down at, I think it was either East Warburton or Big Pat's Creek. I think it was
Big Pat's Creek it would have been. It was there for many years, and at Big Pat's Creek, Richards had the Brimbonga Sawmills and seasoning works, and that was still operating in '58, and he had a Malcolm Moore Day's tractor in there, just in the mill in derelict, and there were also remains of his speeder. He had like a T model Ford or Morris Cowley one or something like that, built as a speeder for him to go out to his mill sites in the Warburton Ranges, and he had quite a big setup there in the seasoning works and stacks of timber, and the rail was all still around the seasoning works there, and they used to move the timber around just by pushing them along the mill workers. They weren't using the tractors or anything at all.
Was that at Britannia Creek, Geoff?
No, that was at Big Pat's Creek.
Oh, Big Pat's Creek. Okay.
Yeah, Britannia Creek's.
That was Cumming Smith's operation, but at Britannia Creek, and they had a wood distillation works there, which they were cutting cordwood out in the bush and bringing it down to the distillation works, and they were producing coke and other chemical creosote and stuff like that out of the timber. So they put it into retorts and heated it up, and then you unloaded the coke and bagged it, and they sold that under the Sickle brand. So and it's interesting that Cumming Smith operated over in Western Australia, and they're still part of Bunnings conglomerate over there. The old works, they had a fertilizer works as well. But it was interesting. I still have a couple of the minute books for the Cumming Smith's operation, and it was full of correspondence between the manager at Britannia Creek and head office in Melbourne over what he could do and when he needed to buy more cast tramway wheels, and if he wanted to sell some rail off and sell bits and pieces. And it was really sort of master servant sort of stuff. The letters were all very correct, and yes, sir, we will do this, and as you have suggested. So it was an interesting time.
Thanks, Geoff, for the memories of the 1968 hike. I was actually only 17 years old at the time on the hike itself, and I do remember the person who was crawling over that trestle bridge was Mark Plummer. I think my photo shows Ray, who was actually walked across it. He actually was upright, and it was still it was a very good hike at the time.
Yeah, well, Ray Jude was fearless. He walked across any bridge. He didn't care about anything. I remember that distinctly, that if you're out in the bush with him, he just set up across. Everyone else would be crawling or going down the gully and up the other side. But no, Ray, no, he just walked across. He had perfect balance.
Yeah. I was on that hike as well. I was quite rapt to see in that picture of the group of us. I was there carrying a little bag that my father obviously gave me because he was I worked for TAA, and the group of all of us when it comes up. I'm watching on the screen.
Yeah.
Has to be here somewhere.
You're going, yeah.
Keep going.
Looks as though some of that was
Yeah, it is,
Yeah.
typewriter.
Yeah, I'm in the front row, third from the right, got a little TAA T-jet bag, and
Oh, yeah.
some of the others are there as well.
Yeah, likely looking at.
Yes, I think I was in somebody who had a Peugeot 404, I think, at the time, driving around.
I think that was Graham Watford. He was a Peugeot man, as I remember, and that was my EH Holden in the front there. So it yes, they are interesting. I've been going through scanning, and I've got nearly 700 photos just of the Warburton Ranges and Powelltown and all of that, and I've been scanning them over the last few months, trying to sort out what was what.
You wouldn't remember the names of all those folk, would you, by any chance?
Well, starting from the left-hand side behind the car is Don Marshall.
Oh, yeah.
The Puppy Billy man, and that's his wife Norma. Then the next couple were my neighbours. We lived in Bozer, and I'm blowed if I can remember their name. They wanted to come along out into the Australian bush. So
Yeah.
then was my wife Val. Now the next one is that you, Ian, or?
No, I'm third from the right.
Murray after the Murray with the mop top.
Right. And Ray Jude, and then Graham Watford. Then going along the back, got someone. Then you got Frank Stampford. Then you got Mark Plummer. I'm not sure who the other one is. And then that was our publications officer.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark wielded a large machete, I think, for most of the hiking.
It was something that you needed, I tell you. It was definitely bush bashing. So
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But in those days, you didn't need a four-wheel drive on those roads.
No,
Uh,
that's right. They hadn't been chopped up by log trucks or anything else, and so we were able to get around there and even up around onto the Federal, because if you kept going out on Dowie Spur, then you could go around onto the Federal Road, which brought you around to the new Federal Mill. But I'll put some of these other pages from this walking book of mine from the, what's it called, 130 walking tours within reach of Melbourne. And as I say, it was published in about 1933, I think. But all it covers all of Victoria, not only just the Yarra Valley and the Wilmington Ranges, but it gives meticulous details on where to go, where there's water, where you can camp for the night, and everything was done by train. So you went by rail to the nearest station. And in the early days, I remember we had, you could get an all lines ticket on the Victorian Railways, which covered, I think, 14 days. So the idea was to see how far you could travel day and night on the train for you, whatever you paid. It wasn't very much anyway.
Have you got any other photos from that walk as well there, Geoff?
I have, but I'll have to sort them out. As I say, I haven't got them with me, but I've got lots of other photos and negatives that I've got to scan and bring in. So
I thought there was one, a couple of photos back that you didn't show the first time.
yeah,
Just flick back. Maybe yeah, that one there.
yeah.
No, hang on, keep going.
So
no,
that's,
other way. Go back the other way. Yeah, that one. Yeah,
that one.
not too far. No, keep going. Just back a few.
That was the one coming into 80 number.
Yeah, that's the 8 of number 2 trestle bridge. But no, there's one you flipped over just before. You've gone too far now. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, that's the
You know,
copy.
yeah, you go back one. Yeah, that one.
This one.
That one, yeah.
You did mention it. This snigging the logs onto bogies.
The log landing somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah,
That looks like, is it power light in the background or is it?
yeah, it is power light in the background.
Yeah.
And as I say, you can see there that they've got logs rolled onto a log landing up in the top left hand of the
Yeah.
photo. But this one here, I'm not sure whether there is a track there or why he's using the jack to get it up, whether it's dropped down or something. It's hard to say.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. When we moved from North Fitzroy out to Blackburn, a neighbour across the road was a steam boiler man. And he lived at Archaeology when he was a young lad, his parents did, and he worked out on one of the tramways out of there. So his job was to work at the Victorian Railway siding and unload sawn timber off the tramway trucks into the wagons. And then on the way back, he was to check the wooden rail and spike in any bits that were broken and change it. And that was when he was about 14, I think he told me he was doing that. And then he got his boiler certificate so that he could operate winches and everything at the mills. And later on, he was, when we knew him, he was the boiler attendant at the Myer Emporium in Melbourne when they had steam boilers. And also in the basement every Christmas, they had live steam about, I'm not sure what gauge, it was bigger than a 7¼ inch gauge. I think it might have been 12 inch or something like that. And he drove the locos there. They were beautiful locos. They'd cost them a fortune to buy. I think they were built by Bassett Loc or something in England. And I'd love to know what happened to them. But so, of course, I could go down there and with Bernie Keenan and ride around on these trains when I was a young lad. It was wonderful.
Geoff, Bill Hanks.
Yeah.
I happen to have a copy of the Melbourne Walk in 1948.
Which one? 19?
1948.
Yeah.
Right, and page 69, there's an article in there, Timber Tramways by Garnet Johnson. And he talks about the Britannia Creek Tramway, Big Patch Tramway, Richards Tramway, Ezards, Federal Timber Company, Starling's Gap, High Lead Area, Goodwood Trading Company, and the Powelltown Tramway. That was given to me by a gentleman who was a walker, probably when I was in the early teens.
Yeah, no, it's the one I've got, as I said, was published in the mid 30s, and it's a really fascinating read. I've tried to see if you can find it anywhere else, but someone gave me a copy of this many, many years ago when I was first interested in going bushwalking, and the only trouble was that what they described and what you saw in 1959, 1960 were so far apart, it was very hard to work out, because they were walking the lines when they were intact and operating still. So, but it's an interesting record, because it tells you which tram lines were still in use and which mills were still in use in that middle 30s period. So, so it's a good historical record.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I seem to recall from right from when my early teens, probably even earlier, people talking about going out in the bush, and the sort of Powelltown, Warburton area was seen to be the mecca for a lot of people to go walking.
Yeah, it was, and because they had a good rail service too. So I remember I said the Friday night or weeknight train, particularly Friday nights from Flinders Street, was the 5 o'clock, which was the Hillsville Warburton train. It left from platform number 1, and if you were in the city, you belted down there to try and get on that, because it was an express. It ran express to Box Hill, so that meant I got home in 20 minutes instead of 40 minutes. So it was a good train to catch. And then at Lilydale, they split the train up, took the Tate electric power cars off, and I think the one I went on, there was a J came down onto it and hooked on, and that left first, and that went to Hillsville with 2 carriages and a van. And then the Warburton train left from Lilydale, and it was the same, and climbed up over Cave Hill and went on to Warburton. Warburton was a pretty popular place for people to go and picnic too. You go up on the train, they advertised in the Victorian Railways, you know, go to Warburton by the river there, and you had the sanitarium factory there, and pretty walks all the way around. If you follow the tram line out from Lala Siding, which was the extension of the Warburton line, out to the sanitarium factory, they were very, very good areas to walk along for families, and there were plenty of picnic spaces and stuff. So you always found at weekends that those weekend trains were well patronised, and people would go up there.
Yeah.
Bruce McLean here, Geoff. Ray Jude brings back some memories for me. Ray and I both went to Mordialloc Chelsea High School in Melbourne, and we became very good friends. And I moved up to Mildura with my employment in 1962, and Ray continued to stay in touch, and he wrote copious letters to me. In fact, I still have a file here full of Ray's letters describing all of his rail fan activities, including his light railway walks through the valleys.
Yeah, it's very important that you keep them, all these, because the world has changed so much that I know when I was a young teenager, you could do whatever you liked. It was you were never afraid of travelling or going anywhere or doing anything, and it was, as I say, if you got the railways or lines ticket, the world was your oyster. You could go away, and your parents didn't mind. Well, they were probably happy that you're out of the house and gone, so they didn't have to worry about you. But No, it was a very good and very interesting people when I was a teenager growing up too.
Yeah. Yeah. Sadly, I believe Ray Jude died in a car accident.
Did he?
Yeah.
No, that's not correct, Bill.
Isn't it? Oh, okay.
And sadly, he took his own life.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you.
Geoff Earl again here. Just curious, in the Powelltown book that you co-authored,
Yeah.
what's happened to Stucky? Is he still around?
Well, he moved to Apollo Bay. He was, I think he's still there. He's president of the Apollo Bay Historical Society. He had a house down there because he used to be the forest officer in the Otways, and he bought a house very early on at Apollo Bay because I stayed down there a few times in the early years, and it was at Marengo, just on the other side of Apollo Bay. And I've seen a couple of, I think he's still around, but I've seen a couple of articles written by him as president of the Apollo Bay Historical Society. So, but he was an interesting character because he'd been a forest officer in a lot of these areas, and he had access to all the Forest Commission files and stuff, which was a mine of information. So, it's in later years, we had a farm at Parker's Corner, which was just north of Erica there. And the back boundary of the farm was the Thompson Valley Tramway of Izzards. It ran along. In fact, the Forest Commission had taken part of our land for the tramway to go through along the creek there. And you could follow those trams right through. And I think Mike's, well, we've done hikes down there with the Light Railway Society when the Border Works were building the Thompson Dam. And that was a fascinating area because Izzard sort of started in Warburton, then he moved down to Erica, the Thompson Valley, and then he moved from there to Swift Creek. And he was a long time. He had the original double-decker bridge across the Yarra River at Warburton, which was a fascinating thing to see, the photographs and drawings of that. So, but perhaps the rest of this part of the Upper Yarra area, I might be able to do another talk. Mike says he's booked up for 2 years now with speakers, so sometime in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, we got any more questions?
Not a question, but I've certainly got a lovely praise, and thank you, Geoff, for a great evening. Norman Drake here from Perth. So thanks, Geoff. Fantastic photographs, fantastic history that you know of, and it's been a real pleasure to listen to you. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you kindly.
John Scott here. I've got a comment. I don't know if you can see that is a rubber stamp. I've got a label on it, and it's come from East Warburton, and the stamp, I don't know if you'll be able to see this. It's a bit hard with the, wait a minute. Can you see?
Just put it back with you, John.
Can you see what's written on it?
Oh, I can't.
I'll tell you, it's BSM in large letters and small letters KD. And that stands for Brimbonga Sawmill, kiln dried.
Oh, right, yeah.
So that is a relic from that sawmill that I retrieved when it was being destroyed. And I made many visits. I'd seen it in full operation, and then to my sadness, I saw it being destroyed. So that is the last remaining piece of the Brimbonga Sawmill.
Yeah.
And that stamp was used to stamp the ends of
the timber,
the timbers as they came out of the kiln.
Yeah, because the hardwood from the Warburton Ranges area there, if it was kiln dried and dressed, made beautiful flooring and furniture timber and lining boards and stuff. It was straight and true and had a beautiful grain through it. So
Well, you mentioned barrel staves. I think
Yeah.
they would have to be the top quality timber, wouldn't they?
yeah, and that's what, as I say, the Federal Timber Company were cutting. And I went to their factory down along the Maribyrnong River there at Footscray. And they had a yard there which was full of old tramway bogies and other bits and pieces, and they were still making barrels, because they used the barrels for a lot of food manufacturing used barrels, and that's what they produced them for.
Mm.
And there weren't too many Coopers left after that. There were a couple around, but they had quite a big operation.
Well, I was lucky enough to live at Lilydale. So when the school holidays came along in the 1960s, I would catch the 153 horsepower rail motor to Yarra Junction with my bicycle on board and ride the 10 miles to Powelltown to see the mill in operation. And as you've mentioned, it was a really remarkably good setup. There were two steam-powered operating sawmills along the road that I could visit on the way. One at Yarra Junction just outside, and the other at Gladysdale. And the remarkable part about the Powelltown Mill was the 40-foot ram that worked the breaking down bench.
That's right, steam-powered ram, yes.
Yeah, and it was important. I was told that it was imported from America.
Yeah, it was state-of-the-art American breaking down saw. They were ahead of their time. It was an amazing piece of machinery.
To see that in operation was really something.
Yeah.
And the logs for the breaking down work, well, the breaking down saw was a cross-cut, steam-driven chainsaw.
Yeah.
How many people have seen a steam-driven chainsaw? And that cut the logs to length so that they could go onto the breaking down bench.
Yeah, no, Powelltown Mill was really ahead of its time. They spent a lot of money on it, but I presume they made a lot of money out of it in the early days. And they had when it burnt down at one stage, it was rebuilt, and it was better than ever. A really amazing operation.
They had 3 Babcock and Wilcox boilers. I saw 2 of them in operation. They were wood-fired, and they had various engines in the mill, of course, and some not working any longer when I saw it, but they really had everything there. And that traverser, I really loved that traverser. It had a beautifully made wooden cabin on it, and it was a work of art. I would say that probably was imported too.
You're probably correct there. I'll see if I can.
It was really something, that traverser.
Yeah, that.
You can just see a bit of the cabin, but it was a really nicely made thing in the beginning.
Yeah, I've got some, because I'd been there a few times. I've got some really good photographs of them operating, and
yeah.
No, I was very impressed with the operation of that mill. So.
Yes, me too.
Right. John. Hi, Beverly Holmes here.
Yeah.
With the wood mill, how long did it go from when it first started to when it ended?
It started, I think it was about 1900 when the railway came in.
1913.
1913. Thanks, Frank. Yeah, because there was a mill there, and they bought the mill out, the hardwood company. Well, it was the Powell Wood Process Company that set it up there originally, and they had the Powell process was a preservative process for timber. So they were going to make railway sleepers for the Transcontinental Railway across to Western Australia, and they sold a lot of them, but the trouble was that the termites didn't respect the treatment, so it didn't work, so they went broke. And the interesting thing was that the Powell Wood Process Company, one of the directors was the ex-Prime Minister, John Gorton, John Rose Gorton. He was
Oh, really?
a member of the company, yeah. But yeah, it's and then they after they closed down, went broke, then they were reorganised, became Victorian Hardwood Company, and they went on from strength to strength after that. And
John Gray Gorton.
Yeah, that's it.
yeah, John Gray, yeah. And it's operated well into, I don't know, was it the 80s, Frank, or?
It's still operating,
Yeah, because
but it's not the same mill.
No, Porter's took them over. But
Yeah,
Porter's,
that's right. It
Yeah.
changed a lot between, it changed quite a bit between 1958 and 1961. And then it subsequently was, well, in effect, totally demolished and replaced with a more modern mill.
yeah,
I think there's still a mill operating there
Yeah, there
on
is.
a much smaller scale.
yeah.
And my other
Still operating
question,
a couple of years ago.
did they actually transport the wood only within their region, or did they go interstate that they were cutting up?
The timber they cut up there
Yeah.
was all went to Yarra Junction and was transported by Victorian Railways from there. So they produced framing timber for house frames, and as I say, they made air dried timber and then used that for machining for furniture and flooring and that too. So it was a big operation. And when Porters took over, because Porters were the main producers of timber dowels and skirts and arcs and things like that. So and they were using the timber from there because, as I say, mountain ash is straight grain, true, beautiful timber. And if it's dried and seasoned, it's excellent.
I heard you mention saying they were sending some timber to Western Australia. I wasn't sure. My father was worked in a timber mill in Western Australia. So
Yeah, they had in the early days. They had a contract to provide railway sleepers. That was the Wood Powell Process Company, which were the treatment was supposedly better than tannalizing, and but it didn't work. The hardwood sleepers are not didn't last. That was the trouble. As I say, termites took no notice of the treatment. They just ate through it. So.
thanks, Geoff, for your time. Really great presentation.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. And brought back a lot of memories.
Sorry. Yeah, well, here, did you do the 2013 Centenary walk? The one that gave rise to the book that
Sorry, I missed it.
Frank Stamford wrote?
I missed that question.
Were you on the 2013 outing? Simon Moorhead led.
Yeah.
The Centenary outing.
Oh yeah, with the one with the book that Frank did.
Yeah, the book.
Yeah.
It's that's an excellent book. The maps are excellent.
What's it called again?
Powelltown Tramway Centenary,
Which
1913 to 2013. That's once available through the society.
who's Centenary?
Powelltown Centenary.
This is a book here. I've got,
That
and I think there's a free PDF version on the website, actually.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. This is it here. You're probably reading it back to front, but that's
that 2013 book was a two-person book, Mike McCarthy and I.
yeah.
And I actually think there's more input in that from Mike McCarthy than from me. The map work in that, which Mike looked after, is quite exceptional in my opinion, especially the recreation of a lot of the details of the tramway out in the bush, the size of the bridges, the depth of cuttings, the nature of the radius of curves and so forth. I don't know of any any railway archaeologists anywhere in the world who have done anything like that.
Can I just say something on that? How much fun we had doing it. We used a combination of some of the original survey plans that were available from the construction of the Powelltown line, which had gradients and curves and stuff like that. That helped, but there was that was about, I think, about 45% of the length. But what we decided to do was to create the equivalent for the rest of the line. So there was a small group of us that did the whole line, really, other than the parts that were, or most of it. We didn't do most of the part between Yarra Junction and Powelltown, because that we had that. But from there right up the high lead and right up through that area, I think it was about 3 or 4 visits. But we had GPS units, laser, rangefinder, which you could use to determine depths of cuttings. We had a technique that involved Peter Evans' son Brett walking forward. We would laser his back to determine the distance from one spot to the other. He's a redhead, by the way, but we reckon he became a redhead after that particular episode. But but it was a terrific thing, and of course we had things to measure altitude as well. So we had all the technology happening, and it was an enormous fun. It was quite a team of us involved, so it was great. It's good to see people appreciate it too.
Yeah.
You had a fancier equipment than we had back in 1959, Mike. See?
Yeah.
All we had was machetes and a camera that didn't take terribly good photographs. So yeah.
Yeah, well, that's very true. But it was still a lot of work, but as I said, good fun.
Well, it preserves it for history. You've got a book there that's amazing, and in years to come, people will say, "Oh, what is all this?" Timber tramways. What are they?
Well, one thing we can say is I think it's pretty accurate. So it's a good record from that viewpoint.
Yeah, that's true. Can I ask you a question, Bill?
I think that book too has also got the contours next to the railway too, so it's very thorough. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah,
Mike?
Yeah. We, as I said, we measured and created the database as we went along, and then the evenings I used to call it. I still use the term when I've been doing some research. In the evenings, it was called cleaning the fish. It's no different than going fishing when you had to come home and scale them and clean them and all the rest of it. Well, it was a matter of extracting all the data and getting it all ready for the for processing and presentation. So or conversion into a map, which is what was produced. So good fun.
Yeah, Bill, that issue of the Melbourne Walker, what was the year that you said?
1948.
Yeah, good. I've got a few copies of it around that I haven't looked at for 100 years. So
yeah,
I might just have it.
There it is.
Interesting to have another read of all those things. I used to do a lot of bushwalking when I was young and stupid.
Wait, any further?
No.
Yeah. Okay, well, Geoff, have you finished talking?
Yeah.
You've done well. Thank you very much. A number of questions being put to you. Is there any other questions need to be asked?
Yeah, Bob Goff, just thought I'd let Geoff know and all the others that I've heard over the last couple of weeks that the Port Douglas tourist railway may be a victim of the COVID. So we're waiting for 100% confirmation on that.
Yeah, that would be a pity if the Ballyhurley Railway disappears. It was my favourite ride every year to go up there and go on that. So
yeah, I did the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, word is that maybe the diesel and one of the steam locos will go back to Mossman Mill, but still looking for somebody to run the place actually. So I think lack of tourists might be a big problem.
Mm.
It's killing everything slowly but surely.
Yeah.
Puffing Billy's the same. They've got the same problem. So
Yeah. Well, every tourist railway in Victoria and every miniature railway in Victoria is
Having the same problem.
struggling.
yeah.
Yeah, we're pretty much like that up here. We were supposed to have a running day this Sunday, had to call it off because with our 3 carriages, we could only have 1 person per carriage. So that put things back a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes it a bit hard. They call it the new COVID normal.
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. All right, if that's it, there's no one else got anything they want to ask. We might call it an evening there.
Not a question, but just an observation or a memory that back in 1983, just after Ash Wednesday, because the fires went through all that area and cleaned everything up. It was a lot easier to find things out there, especially around Nails West and those places. The old sawdust heap, came to light and you could get to it quite easily, the other side of the Buff Tunnel. And because then after that, it just all grew up dead sapling cover after that, and you couldn't see a thing.
Yeah. I think when those Black Saturday fires went through up in the Wandong area, we had a team of people hit that area for a while, but I think it was 12 months, 2 years later, you couldn't find anything.
Yeah.
It all grown back. Yeah.
Doesn't take long to take over.
No, it certainly doesn't. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Geoff, for that. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
And good to see your face again.
Yeah.
And Mike, have you got anything else you'd like to say?
Just one thing, Bill, just to let everyone know that in the next week or so, Geoff's talk will be up, as long as he's happy for us to do this. We'll be up on the website. You can watch it again. We have the last 2 presentations also up there now. So if you missed one of those and want to see it, you can go back and have a bit of a squiz. And hopefully we'll have one of the other earlier ones up shortly. And that'll be what happens from now on. The aim will be to create a repository of past presentations that people can go and have a bit of a look at. So that's all, Bill.
All right. Thank you very much, Mike. And thank you for your technical assistance tonight in getting this show on the road.
No worries.
And anyone else that's contributed in the background. And as a matter of interest, do we have many people in from overseas? No. Okay.
I'm watching from the UK. All very good as usual.
Oh, right. Thank you very much for tuning in. That's much appreciated. That I see we got Norman from Western Australia there, so it was good that you could get in too. And you've still got a few hours before you have to go to bed.
You got a whole day.
Yes.
Oh, not quite.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, and look forward to seeing you again in 2 months' time.
If I could just ask a question.
Thanks, Geoff.
Yeah, all right.
That was great.
Thank you very much.
Good night to all.
Somebody's got a question.
Yeah, just me. Is the recording be on the lrrsa.org website or somewhere else?
No, if you go to that website, up at the top of the page, you'll see a tab there that says events. If you click on that and follow your nose, you'll find it quite easily.
Okay, thanks.
All
Yeah,
right.
got that.
Very good. All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
On speaker at the moment.
Very good.
Good night,
Thank
good
you.
morning, or good afternoon.
Thanks, Geoff.
Yeah.
Good night, all.
See ya.
Good night all.
Everyone, good night.
Good night.
Catch you next time.
Drive safely.
Bye.
Bye.
Just, I'll fix it up.
It's frozen again.
Must be time for a coffee.
Ah, too late. Maybe a cup of tea.
Oh, that'll do.
Frank, are you still there for a sec? Frank Stanford, you got a minute? I noticed the video of Puffing Billy went up recently from a movie. Have you got a converter to convert Super 8s or Standard 8s to
I'll
MP4?
leave the meeting.
We'll just see what he's up to there for a minute.
You still there, Murray?
Yeah, yes, I am, Frank.
You're asking me if I had something that could convert 8 mil to
Yeah, to a digital
digitise.
format. Yeah, I thought I saw a movie recently of Puffing Billy in the 40s or 50s.
Oh, I see.
And I thought, I didn't know if you had done that or somebody else converted it.
How long is it?
It was about 10 or 15 minutes, I think. I only saw it a few days ago, I thought, on the Facebook page.
There's a,
You're talking about the movie that I put up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wondered, how did you do that conversion? Or
Yes, I did.
okay, what did you actually use to make the conversion?
I'll send you an email.
Okay, that'll be fine.
Because I can't remember what it's called offhand. I don't use it very often.
Oh, okay.
I almost bought it specially for that particular film because I thought that film was rather special. But yeah, I'll contact you by email.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll add you to my to-do list.
Okay, it's murray@felsted.com.
I'll find you. I think you're a member, are you not?
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll find you.
Okay, thanks for that, Frank.
Good.
by the way, if you look on the current YouTube, there's quite a few shots of Puffing Billy on it. And also the reunion they did was it down at the Goldfields Railway in out of Walhalla. I found it quite interesting, and there's quite a few hours of watching of the various events of getting the 7A down to Walhalla, and from it was running from the Thompson River into Walhalla and back again. And there's looks as though there's quite a few quite a few big diesels down there now. So it was I found it quite interesting.
I enjoyed that. That was quite a good place.
Yeah.
Historical.
Yeah. And some of vintage stuff of Puffing Billy before it, when it used to still run from Upper Ferntree Gully through Belgrave and on the rest of the way. Remember, when I was a kid, I did a trip on that, and we caught the train at Upper Ferntree Gully, went to Gembrook. By the time we got to Gembrook, it was running late. And we just about had enough time to nick down to the nearest pub and grab something to eat before it was time for it to go back. Time it got back to Upper Ferntree Gully, it was night. And they had the lanterns on in the carriages. And I was only a little tacker at the time. It must have been in the very early 1940s. But, so anyway, if you want to, I can just recommend some of the stuff that's on YouTube. If you miss the naughty ones, it's okay.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I remember reading that as far as the total videos that went on YouTube, there's something like so many days videos went on each and every second. So it's a heck of a lot of hard drive.
Yeah, well, you don't try to download it.
Okay, everyone, we might call it quits there.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for running it too.
No worries. Night all, everybody.
Good night, all. Good night.
Great night. Thank you.